Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's public webinar. My name is Deanne Fisher. I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Customer Service with Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. I'm honored to be your host for this important discussion about the new agreement for Churchill Falls Power and to provide this opportunity to discuss what this means for our province. Joining us today are Jennifer Williams, President and CEO, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro; Walter Parsons, VP, Transmission Interconnections and Business Development, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro; and Michael Latta, Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary, also with Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. The purpose of this session is to hear directly from you, our communities across the province. We're here to answer your questions about the Churchill Falls Memorandum of Understanding and what this historic agreement means for our future. We will do our best to address as many of your questions as possible during this session. Before we begin, let me briefly explain how this virtual town hall will work. Right now, residents from across the province are joining us on video or by telephone. In a moment, I'll hand things over to the team who are going to walk us through a brief presentation. Our goal in providing this presentation is to provide everyone with the main points about this agreement in as easily digestible manner as possible. If anyone wishes to take a deeper dive into some of the numbers and details, we have another more detailed presentation on the www.ourchapter.ca website under resources. It's titled Technical Briefing Presentation, dated December 12th, 2024. So after the brief presentation by the team, we'll move into the Q&A portion where we'll address the questions that are most important to you. But first, some housekeeping notes to help you participate. If you're joining us on video, click the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue. If you're joining us by phone, press star on your keypad to raise your hand. You'll be connected to an operator who will take your question and add it to the queue. For online participants, you can also type your question into the question field and an operator will address it. Also, if we don't get to your question today, keep an eye out for our website, www.ourchapter.ca, where we'll be adding more frequently asked questions and sharing additional resources and webinar recordings after. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available online in the future. For your privacy, only those with speaking roles can be seen on the screen, and no other personal information will be visible beyond the name and location you share with the operators. We thought we'd start today with a quick poll to gather your thoughts. I'll read out the question and response options, and you can participate using the Vote tab on your screen or by pressing the corresponding number on your phone keypad. So let's get started. Our question is, how familiar are you with the new Memorandum of Understanding between Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec regarding Churchill Falls? Number 1, very familiar, I've read the details. Number 2, somewhat familiar, I know the basics. Number 3, not very familiar, I've heard about it but don't know the specifics. And finally, number 4, not familiar at all. This is my first time hearing about it. Once again, if you'd like to participate, you can use the Vote tab on your screen or press the corresponding number on your phone. So we're just going to give folks a couple of minutes to tabulate their votes. Okay, so I'd like to now pass things over to the team to take us through the presentation, after which we're going to move right into the Q&A session. So just a reminder, you can press star on your phone or click the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue. So just to go back for a moment before we get into the presentation, We have the results of the votes, and it is number 2, somewhat familiar. I know the basics. And number 3, not very familiar. I've heard about it, but don't know the specifics. So we'll keep that in mind as we try to answer your questions today. But now I'm going to turn it over, and I think Jennifer's going to get us started. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Deanne. And certainly thank you for everyone joining today. We know it's your time is precious, but this is also such an important file that we're really, really pleased with all of the engagement. And we look forward to your questions today. What you can expect is hopefully a fairly short presentation, but we do think we need to take, I guess, the time to provide for some of the information, certainly based on the poll that we saw just then. So it'll be about a 25-minute or so presentation, and then we'll have hopefully then about a full hour to take your questions. And we had a session yesterday, and it was excellent. We got all kinds of questions from somewhat technical to fairly straightforward. So we're really, really pleased with that. So thank you all for joining. So first slide, please, Deanne. This is just some background to help folks understand what's our starting point and why are we in this conversation right now with Quebec. For anybody who doesn't know, the Churchill Falls plant provides Quebec with 15% of their power. Now, certainly, as they expand their power system, that percentage will change, and it won't be as big a percentage, but it'll still be a very, very important component of their system into the future. The contract that we currently operate under was entered into in 1969, and today it provides Quebec with essentially free power. Yes, they do pay for it at 0.2 cents a kilowatt hour. And when you think about that as compared to your bills, that's just the generation component. But it is a fixed price contract. It does not change with time. It does not change with how costs in Quebec change. And it certainly doesn't reflect as well the prices in the markets. So because of that, and because Quebec has had excess power essentially to date, but not really so much anymore, they have made billions over 50 years because they had access to this essentially free power. Our jurisdiction has tried to change the contract and challenge the contract for decades in various legal avenues, and they've been exhausted right up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the Supreme Court basically deemed the contract valid. Whether we agree that it's fair from the legal perspective, contract is deemed valid. Next slide, please. And further to that, the contract would remain valid and in force for the next 17 years. Here's a piece of information as well that not everybody knows, that our province owns about 2/3. It's a slightly different percentage, but for the sake of this conversation, it owns about 2/3 of the facility and all of the associated transmission. And Quebec owns about 1/3. This does not change in 2041. So Hydro-Quebec will continue to be a significant shareholder of Churchill Falls after 2041. The other aspect that's really important to consider is between now and 2041, Quebec has veto power over any decisions that Churchill Falls CFLco would make between now and 2041. So that's also really important to think about. So what this new agreement does and what we have achieved is it will terminate the existing contract effective now 13 days ago on January 1st of 2025, but it'll be in effect after we sign definitive agreements. And the contract will be replaced with a new and a fair and a competitive contract for the Upper Churchill Power, but certainly as well for development of other parts of the opportunities in Labrador that we currently are not pursuing with Quebec. So the next slide, please. So what has been achieved with the framework in the Memorandum of Understanding that we have is power price will increase. It is no longer fixed. It is no longer fixed. And so how can we make that claim? Basically, instead of the price just being fixed and written in ink, this is the price that has to be paid. There's a schedule in the MOU, one of the pages in the MOU that details how the price will be created, or I guess how it will pay you over time. And instead of it being fixed, we're tying the price to several indices, we're calling them. One is the electricity markets. So you would have heard lots of discussion over time about how, well, if we could only just get access to the markets and get the price that they pay in the markets, it would be fair to us. So what we've done is that there's three indicators in the MOU that we're tying to. One is those electricity markets in the Northeast, really cross-border into the United States. Another indicator for what the price will be connected to is the cost to replace or build new sources in Quebec. And this is where the price will really, the Churchill Falls power will really be valuable, even more so into the future, because those sources are much more costly down the road. And then the other indicator of the price will be the cost of electricity in Quebec. So for all of those things, they are not going to go down over time. It is not likely. It is likely that certainly in the combined effect, they will go up. Therefore, we no longer have a fixed contract. We will have a contract where the price increases. So what does that bring? Well, it will bring 17 years of substantial money to Newfoundland and Labrador, or if we don't pursue this, essentially free power to Quebec, and where we receive almost no money to provincial treasury. And that is, again, for the 17 years. Certainly after the 17 years, the same would apply. But what the opportunity is for us is to have 17 years of substantial revenue or almost nothing to the province. The other piece, and the team will get into this, the other aspect coming out of this opportunity, this memorandum of understanding, is that there are 4 mega projects in Labrador that we want to build with Hydro-Quebec. And in order to do that, we didn't want to have any risk based on the Muskrat Falls scenario. We did not want to have any risk for our province. So we negotiated $3.5 billion to cover the cost of our ownership share in those new developments. So that was a really important aspect of this opportunity as well. Those projects are currently sitting undeveloped, and we have negotiated a significant financial injection from Hydro-Quebec to pay our equity, and therefore we don't have to bear the cost of that. And then that will then obviously deliver over the next 10 years of planned construction, thousands of jobs for the people in the province. Next slide, please. So this is not the same contract as 1969. There are some that are suggesting that it is. I cannot be more clear. It is not the same contract as 1969. Essentially, they have 17 years of free power now. They're in effect getting 34 more years beyond that of access to power. They have essentially access to free power to 2041. The other piece that is really, really important, and anybody from Labrador listening, you would certainly know why this is really important, is that there's the opportunity for significant additional industrial expansion in Labrador. And currently, we are not accessing any additional power beyond what we have had for decades. But we do have customers, big customers, that would like to get access to more significant blocks of power. And that would deliver significant growth in the mining and industries in Labrador, which certainly benefits Labrador, but as well has a benefit for the province. We've also built into the contract a process to capture future value, and we can get into that a little bit later, but basically is additional blocks of power will come back to our province in later decades, and we can value those accordingly to what the value is of electricity at the time. Another really important aspect within this MOU is that the legal jurisdiction is now neutral. So in the current contract, so for the next 17 years, any legal disputes, it would be heard in Quebec courts first. And that hasn't gone our way in the past. But even though it does go to the Supreme Court, what we have negotiated is a neutral jurisdiction, and that is Ontario. And that is normal for contracts of this nature. And it's certainly normal when you have cross-border type contracts. Also, in the MOU, we have negotiated that the the shareholders agreement, which is where Quebec currently has its veto power, that will remove the veto power. And the other aspect there is that we will manage, Newfoundland Labrador Hydro will manage all of the hydro plants in the Churchill River. We obviously manage Churchill Falls now and Muskrat Falls, but any new facilities, for example, Gull Island, a second powerhouse at Churchill Falls, Hydro will manage them. And then all of this together, it's really important that we also have an agreement with Quebec to improve the water management of the water in the river. So all of that together will deliver to provincial treasury $227 billion. And I'm going to say this repeatedly today. This is after Quebec gets its dividends. And because there is also some misunderstanding publicly that, nope, Quebec is going to have to take their dividends. No, this is after dividends have been provided to Quebec and also after all of the operating costs of all of the facilities. So it's also really, really important. So this is truly direct to provincial treasury, truly money for government of the day to decide how they want to administer that. So that brings me to the end of my opening section, and I'll now hand it over to Walter.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Walter Parsons. I'm a vice president at Hydro, and I'm going to walk through the new proposed agreement and really divide it up into its two component parts. So first, I'm going to talk about the new power contract as it relates to existing Churchill Falls. And then I will get into the separate component that deals with these new developments on the Churchill River. And it's really the two components of this agreement that sum up to providing the $227 billion to the provincial treasury. So first part, we have agreed in the MOU that we will, as two utilities, terminate the existing contracts for Churchill Falls and replace the power contract with something entirely new. And of course, as we've talked about, the legal agreements for this new contract and the rest of the concepts in this MOU still have to be negotiated. The MOU lays out the high-level concepts that we've agreed, but now we will be entering into a period of negotiating these legal agreements. This new agreement for Churchill Falls, as I mentioned, will end the 1969 agreement and the other agreements that are associated with that provide Hydro-Quebec with the almost free electricity, the 0.2 cents, that will be fully terminated. There will be a new contract put in place for the sale of the Churchill Falls power that includes price escalation that Jennifer talked a little bit about in her intro. The new price will be connected to the markets and to alternative supply costs that Jennifer talked about earlier. But in the aggregate, based on our current forecast, the new price will be approximately 30 times higher than the current price going in. And that will yield, again, after paying all the costs and after Hydro-Quebec takes its share, that will yield an average of $1 billion per year over the next 17 years to government. So $17 billion by taking this decision to terminate and to put a new contract in place. And again, that $17 billion is new revenue. And it's not a loan in any form. It's not moving money from the future and pulling it back to now. It's simply $17 billion of new revenues by virtue of the new pricing that the new contract will include. And so Churchill Falls and this new contract will provide to government $180 billion over the life of that contract from 2025 to 2075. So remember, we talked about $227 billion to the province in the entirety. Well, about 80% of that comes from Churchill Falls itself. Of course, Churchill Falls, massive facility, providing 15% of Quebec's power, and it's essentially a paid-off asset. It has a very efficient operation, and therefore it is going to be the source of 80% of this revenue to Hydro and then on to government. Now, this new contract, this new money, new pricing is not tied in any way to whether or not, say, Gull Island or the other projects go ahead. That's the second part of the deal, which I'm going to talk about next. But if the second part doesn't happen for any reason, that has no impact on the pricing for Churchill Falls, which is providing this $180 billion. So I just wanted to point out how they're two separate components of the deal. Okay, we can jump to perfect. Thank you, folks. So the second part is the new developments on the Churchill River. And Jennifer mentioned this earlier, but through the last couple of years and our negotiations with Hydro-Quebec, we have now agreed that for the right to partner with us and to participate in these projects, Hydro-Quebec will pay $3.5 billion. That's expressed in today's dollars. They'll pay $3.5 billion upfront, in addition to paying the cost of these projects and the return on our investment. They will pay an additional $3.5 billion, what we're calling an option payment, or essentially a pay to play for a right to join this partnership. And this partnership will see the construction of the 4 projects listed here. Gull Island, which I know is well known in this province, and it's well known in energy space across North America. It's the best undeveloped hydro site in North America, which is pretty much universally agreed. It is a huge, huge project, 3 times the size of Muskrat Falls. So that's the first of the 4. Secondly is Churchill Falls 2, which is a second powerhouse added at the Churchill Falls site. This would really increase the output of Churchill Falls by the peak output by about 20%. And it is a massive facility in its own right. It is a second powerhouse underground in the rock, essentially about 200 meters west of the existing powerhouse. So it would be managed once it's constructed. It would be managed by our existing Churchill Falls team. But it is a huge construction project that would happen essentially over the next decade as well. Though there is less pre-work done on this project, and there will be some more environmental work required. Thirdly, we are planning to upgrade the existing Churchill Falls units. We've got 11 generators at Churchill Falls. They are 55 years old, and they're coming towards the end of their life. We can now replace those generators with more efficient technology. And we're going to do that 1 per year over about 11 years. And that will increase in itself the output of Churchill Falls by about 10%. So that's a big plant already. And adding 10% to that huge facility is also a very large project that we will manage by our own team in Churchill Falls. And of course, none of the new generation makes sense without new transmission. So we are going to build transmission here in Newfoundland and Labrador to move the electricity. And that will be transmission between Churchill Falls and Gull Island to allow those 2 plants to work together efficiently. And there will be a new line from Gull Island into Quebec. And we will build that transmission on our side of the border and own it, obviously. And it will connect at the border with new transmission that Hydro-Quebec is going to build to receive the power. And of course, we have rights to use some of that power in our own province from the new assets, but most of it will flow into Quebec because they are huge facilities. Gull Island bigger than the demand of our entire province. So Hydro-Quebec needs to build a lot of transmission to take that power. And overall, these new assets will have a very similar ownership structure to Churchill Falls today, and that is it will be 2/3 owned by Newfoundland Labrador Hydro, our company, which is a Crown corporation owned by the people of the province, and then Hydro-Quebec will own 1/3 of that asset grouping. I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague, Michael Latta, to pick up the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Walter, and good morning, everybody. As Deanne said, my name is Michael Latta. I'm also a VP at Hydro and the Chief Legal Officer. I'm going to talk about who is responsible for what in terms of construction for the new developments that Walter just outlined as between Hydro-Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. And then I will also talk about some additional general facts about the deal. So first, what Hydro-Quebec will construct. It's going to be responsible for constructing Gull Island, Churchill Falls, and the transmission on their side of the border. Important to note that Gull Island and Churchill Falls 2 are the largest of the new developments, so they will construct the 2 largest. There will then be a power purchase agreement under which Hydro-Quebec will buy power from those developments for 50 years. A few things to note from that power purchase agreement. All of the costs associated with developing and constructing those projects will be borne by Hydro-Quebec. Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro will make 8 to 9% on the investment for those projects. And lastly, risk. Hydro-Quebec will be responsible for any cost overruns associated with Gull Island and Churchill Falls 2. Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro does not bear any of that risk. Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, on the other hand, will construct the two smallest of the new developments, those being the turbine upgrades for the 11 existing units at the existing CF plant and the transmission lines in Labrador, because of course none of this generation works without enabling transmission to connect at all. Out of all these new developments and the existing Churchill Falls plant, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro will have access to 4 times more power to serve customers in Labrador than it does today. And I want to emphasize that because it is really important. 4 times more than what we have today. As many of you would know, we have used all of our allocation of power from the existing Churchill Falls plant, and there's currently no ability for business and industrial growth in Labrador. 4 times more power will enable that growth. Some other general facts about the Memorandum of Understanding. First, the pricing for the new developments will increase annually at 2%. Contrast that to the 1969 deal, which was fixed and did not escalate at all. As Jennifer said earlier, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro will operate all of the facilities on the Churchill River as it currently does today with the existing Churchill Falls plant. Third, the MOU is non-binding, and I need to say that that is normal for a high-value, complex deal such as this. It's very normal for 2 parties entering into a deal such as this to first reach a non-binding memorandum of understanding or agreement of principle that sets the framework or roadmap from which the parties will then negotiate final agreements. And that is, in fact, the next stage that we are now starting, negotiation of those definitive agreements. The target date for negotiation of those definitive agreements is in the MOU, and it is April 30th of 2026. We need to start right away. As we continue through these negotiations, we will engage external third-party experts, a couple of whom you heard from last week in the special sitting of the House of Assembly. They include our financial experts, our energy marketing experts, and also legal advisors. And finally, and importantly, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro will fully cooperate with the consumer advocate and the independent panel that was announced by the provincial government during the special sitting of the House of Assembly last week. Hydro is fully committed to transparency and welcomes scrutiny. Hopefully that was on display last week as we answered questions from our MHAs. We are used to being questioned by the consumer advocate, and we welcome this opportunity going forward to participate in that independent oversight. I'm going to hand it back to Jennifer now to talk about the jobs associated with the MOU.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So this is just a little more detail about how will the jobs actually materialize for these major projects that are envisioned to be executed over the coming years. As we've talked about, there are 4 major projects. And stating the obvious, there's a lot of jobs associated with more than $33 billion in investment that would occur in Labrador. So there'll be thousands of jobs that are actually folks on the ground, either directly on site, on the tools, the engineering, the project management, all of those aspects of construction. Those are the direct jobs that would occur. There'll be thousands of spin-offs during construction as well. Just interestingly, there was a story in one of the local news organizations today that talked about the Labradorian is rethinking change in its future in consideration of this, that instead of moving to a different kind of facility, it might actually indeed stay as a hotel. That's the kinds of things that we think about when we think about the spin-off jobs during construction. And then the third area where there would be jobs that would result is, as Michael talked about, the power that would be provided with confidence to these very large industrial customers in Labrador. They then need more people. They then need people to construct their facility expansion. So there'd be jobs there as well. So how does this all manifest? How do we know that this would actually benefit directly the people of this province. And for Gull Island, that was, it received an environmental release in the early 2010s associated with the total Lower Churchill project, which was both Muskrat Falls and Gull Island. So it has an existing environmental assessment released. And contained within that, it is basically into legislation, and then there's a legal requirement for it, the hiring protocol. It's sort of connected in a couple of different documents, but there is a requirement to adhere to this assessment outcomes that requires a protocol, and I'll get into it on the next slide, for how people would be hired. So that is very clearly already laid out. That I will say as well, that is one of the reasons why having an environmental assessment done, that this is an attractive project for both us and Quebec to work on together. It is much more ready to go than other projects that do not have an environmental release. Churchill Falls 2, the second largest project that Michael described, does not have an environmental release. So our team will have to get working on that as soon as we can get through some of the definitive agreement work, to work with the provincial government and any other authorities on what would be contained in an environmental assessment and then hopefully a release. However, the jobs implications that would potentially come from an environmental release for Churchill Falls 2, it is reasonable to expect it would not be materially different than what might be in existence for Gull Island. It'll be a dozen years later that this one is done, and so it'd be obviously new thinking. But what is contained in the existing Gull Island release, and therefore jobs, hiring protocol, is not that different than you'd see in any major project in any other jurisdiction across Canada. So when I say it's reasonable to assume or to think that it would look similar, I think that that's a valid statement. Certainly, we have to wait for the process to go through, but it's okay for us to expect similar requirements. So now I'll get into on the next slide, what does that actually look like? So the legal requirement, again, lists out very clearly who has to be hired. And you'll see the word qualified there in each of those steps. And when we talk about qualified, that means primarily kind of a red seal type thing. So if we need electricians, generally they'll have to be red seal electricians. It can't just be, well, I know how to wire up my house. I should be able to get a job. I'm qualified. So it is going to be obviously very much for safety and for quality purposes. Qualified will be a requirement, but we have time to ensure as many people as possible in the province are qualified. But this is the hiring priority. So first, members of Innu Nation will be hired first, qualified members of Innu Nation. Second, qualified residents of Labrador would be hired. Third, qualified residents of the province would be hired. And then after all of those, qualified residents from the rest of Canada could be hired. So this is all very clearly laid out. And I believe this brings us to our summary slide, and we'll get into your questions. So as we've talked about earlier, this is direct to Treasury, more than $225 billion associated with the two aspects of what this MOU takes on, the CFPPA and the new developments. Under the CFPPA, as Walter said, that's where 80% of the value is. It's $180 billion of the 225. The remainder, $48 billion, is associated with the new developments. The price for the power increases in both the existing facility, in the existing contract, in the existing Churchill Falls plant, and the price for power increases in the new developments as well. By renewing early, instead of in 2041, we would enjoy $17 billion after operating costs, after Quebec gets its dividends, $17 billion to provincial treasury for the government of the time to choose what is most appropriate. Development of Gull Island with no financial risks for the province, very different than Muskrat Falls. There are 4 new projects expected with thousands of jobs available. We have access to nearly 4 times the power for use in Labrador. This is a significant amount. We've had the same amount of power for decades, and we can now have access to 4 times the amount of power. This therefore then leads to industrial development in Labrador, which certainly develops and benefits Labrador, but has the knock-on effect of benefiting the whole province. And very importantly, we will honor all of our existing agreements with Indigenous communities in Labrador, and we will engage and consult on the future developments that we are undertaking. And that brings us to the end of our summary. So we're happy now to take on questions from anybody at all.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just a reminder for participants that you can press the star on your phone or click raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue. I would also ask folks online if they can enter their question into the question queue as well. I'm going to jump in here now and take our first question. And Jennifer, you can decide if you'd like to take this or pass it on to someone else. The first question is, why are Quebec's numbers different from Newfoundland and Labrador's numbers?
Sure. Yep. No, I'll take that. And then certainly if Michael or Walter want to jump in to add any additional information, that would be great. First, I would like to note the joint press release, which I'm 99% sure is on our chapter.ca website, is available. And it makes very clear the numbers that have been agreed to. And the numbers that have been agreed to, as we've talked about, is for the CFPPA, it's an effective price of almost 6 cents a kilowatt hour. So Quebec have signed this press release with us. So it is not something that we've made up. I have to be very, very clear about that. So I invite everybody to read the press release and see that number. The reason why Quebec is saying different numbers is that immediately, instead of getting essentially free power for the next 17 years, Quebec will have to start paying a significantly higher percentage of power for 15% of the power that it derives. So certainly this is an important I guess this would be, I'm expecting a concern for the customers in Quebec. What Quebec have, and it's totally their right to do so, have talked about publicly is they plan on using their dividends to make the effective price for their customers lower. So they're going to take their dividends from CFLCO and they're going to apply it against the total costs they have to pay. And they'll say they'll pay a lower number. They're not paying a lower number. The effect is lower on their customers. So that is totally within their right, but they are paying the number that they agreed to in the joint press release. Certainly, they also have signed the memorandum with us. So all of those power prices are laid out as well. Walter or Michael, would you want to add anything to that? But it's essentially, they're doing rate mitigation, but they are paying the full price as we've already discussed.
Okay. Just a reminder once again that if you're on the phone, you can press star on your keypad and you will be connected to an operator who will enter your question into the question queue. Or you can click the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue and enter your question there online. So I'm going to move to another question now. Are you concerned about the length of the power purchase agreement? You're signing another 50-year agreement.
Yeah, I could take that. And then
Sure.
again, the folks to jump in. As we've outlined, they have access to 17 years as is. So they are getting essentially 34 more years. But I understand the premise of the question. So it is a 50-year contract. The problem with the original contract for the CFPPA was it had a fixed price that never changed. What we have de-engineered, or we've engineered out that issue for the duration of this contract. And what it basically does is it takes a number of price indicators and it has brought those into this contract. So as they change over time, so will the price will change over time. And that is the primary reason why we are comfortable that the issue that with the original contract is now engineered out of this contract, is the price will change with the value that it is in the system. So the need to break into the contract in 10 or 20 years time to say, oh, the value of the contract or the value of energy is different now in the market. We've actually brought in an evolving price mechanism that will allow for the prices to change over time with what is happening in the market. That's why we're comfortable. Again, Michael or Walter, I don't know if you want to have any comment on that. No? Good.
I think that covers it. Yeah. Okay, great. We have a question here coming in from Wayne, who says, why is there such a disconnect between presenters and those who claim this is another giveaway to Quebec? Jennifer, I think you may want to jump in there.
Okay, why would there be a disconnect? Perhaps, I mean, certainly, well, some of this information can be very complicated. Well, I'll start with this. I'll probably say several things. At the very beginning of this information coming out, the document that is attached, the MOU, is a document between two utilities. It is not between two governments. And so that, I think, might have been maybe, I don't want to say misunderstood, but not really close enough paid attention to. And you would hear some folks saying, well, and they'll, for example, I'll tell you some of the mistakes that we saw. People will read a schedule in the MOU, not really close enough, and I'm going to be quite direct, not read close enough the title of the schedule that would say payments from HQ to CFLCO. And people would say, well, that's payments to the provincial government. And it is not. So I think part of the early reasons for the disconnect has been taking a very complicated document between two utilities, which we wanted to be very transparent and upload it. And then folks really probably reading it quickly and maybe not paying enough attention to the various charts, because we saw a number of mistakes being made publicly in an incorrect read of the MOU. So that is part of it. And I do think that, and then to take that probably even further, is it is a very complicated document, and for us, it's quite easy to understand the implications and have the math done for the implications. And because we've been dealing with this, as one of the advisors said, we've had dozens of people working on this for thousands of hours. So we obviously understand the content and connect the dots a lot easier. And we do have, say, some of the folks in the public who are trying, and which is helpful for that public scrutiny, trying to connect the dots, but in some instances, not quite getting it. The other component is, I do think that there's a lot of folks who maybe are still connected to the history. And I think it's been very clear for us as a province that this is a moment go forward. And I think the Premier has talked about that this is about, as a province, we really have to be talking about what is the value go forward as opposed to the history. Really hard for all of us to disconnect the unfairness of history here with regards to our characterization about what it means go forward. This deal has to work for Quebec as well. It 100% does. There is no deal where one party is significantly harmed compared to the other. This has to be good for both of us. So I'll sort of leave it there, but I really can't explain why incorrect information continues to be circulated.
And just as a follow-up to that, Jennifer, I will remind folks that in the documents portion of the platform here, you will see that you have access to the MOU. You also have a copy of the presentation we provided today, and also with a fact sheet that has been provided. All of those documents are also available on the website, www.ourchapter.ca, along with some frequently asked questions, which we're putting out there in the hopes that people can get the information directly for themselves. So with that in mind now, just another reminder that you can press star on your phone and you'll be connected to an operator who will enter your question into the question queue, or press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue and type your question in there. So I'm going to move to a question now that comes from, I think it's Derek. So Derek asks, what is the impetus for Quebec being willing to renegotiate now? Why haven't they been in the past 33 years? So I guess that's the why now. And Walter, did you want to jump in there?
Yes, I'll take a crack at this one. I mean, it has been a very lucrative contract for Hydro-Quebec. Obviously signed in 1969. Energy prices increased a lot, and yet the contract price was fixed. And so it's been a very, very important asset for them holding on to that contract. Despite all the legal challenges, it has been deemed valid. And so it is due to stay in effect for a total of 65 years, taking us to 2041. So it's no surprise that they've held on to it for so long. But now that we're inside the last 17 years of the contract, there's really a couple of things going on. One, Hydro-Quebec needs to plan for the end of the contract. And if Churchill Falls is not going to be contracted to Hydro-Quebec, then they would lose 15% of their power, on that day, August 31st, 2041. And that would be a bad day for Hydro-Quebec that they would have the plan for and put alternative energy projects in place in time. And as you know from Muskrat Falls and other projects in other jurisdictions, it takes pretty close to anywhere from 10 to 15 years to build a hydro project or a large nuclear project or any projects that could help replace Churchill. It certainly takes a very long time. So Hydro-Quebec is really at the decision time right now. They have to decide what they're going to do about 2041 now. The time is essentially up. In our industry, 17 years is really a blink of an eye because it takes so long to build alternatives. So that's why they've come to us. And also, secondly, because they're seeing a huge spike in new electricity demand, just like we're seeing and the rest of the Western world is seeing. So they're also looking for more power. And so that's why they're interested in new projects on the river and securing their energy future from Churchill Falls. So really, Hydro-Quebec has finally reached a point where they're extremely motivated to do something, to pay a lot more, and to do certain things like pay for our equity in the new projects, take all of the risks on the new projects. A lot of people say, why are they doing all this? It doesn't seem, it seems too good to be true in some ways, but it's providing a big benefit to Hydro-Quebec, energy security, new access to power, such that they're willing to do these things now. They will do well from this deal. I'll reiterate what Jennifer said. They're going to save money from doing this deal, and we are going to make a lot of money from this deal. So it's really a commercial transaction that makes sense. Two parties coming together and each leaving much better off than when they came in. Sorry for the long answer.
Nope, that's okay. I think folks will appreciate that explanation, Walter. So I'll move on to another question now that comes from Jeff. Can you explain how the dividend process takes place and insert where in the process the government of NL gets its portion? Sorry, I just lost the question here. Bear with me for a second. If somebody can get, so maybe Michael, you can just jump in the meantime and explain how the dividend portion is explained.
Sure, and I'll do this in the context of the CF plant. So first of all, it's important to remember that CFLCO does not just have the revenues that Hydro-Quebec pays to it for power. It also has the revenues that Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro pays to it for power, which are not contained in this MOU. Walter has said this many times, but one of the small silver linings of the 1969 contract is that Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro was also able to purchase power from CFLCO to serve Labrador at that same very, very low, almost free rate of 0.2 cents a kilowatt hour. So in terms of dividends, both of those income streams, again, from Hydro-Quebec and from Newfoundland Labrador Hydro, come into CFLCO. CFLCO then needs to cover all of its costs. So it needs to pay its staff, it needs to pay its contractors, it needs to funnel money back into the plant for maintenance and sustaining capital. So that cost comes off. CFLCO then has to pay water rentals and royalties to the province. So that cost comes off. Once all of its costs are paid, whatever is left is profit. That profit gets then dividended. 2/3 of it essentially goes to the Newfoundland and Labrador Treasury, and 1/3 of it goes to the Quebec Treasury, based on Hydro-Quebec's 1/3 ownership of the plant.
Great, thank you for that. So another question here coming from Rob, who says, regarding third-party experts, should they be independent third-party experts? This will provide another check by experts who have no connection to those who developed the MOU. Did you want to take a crack at that, Jennifer, about our experts, and then maybe also talk about the independent panel that's been announced?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thanks so much. And thanks for the question. I expect a number of folks paid attention to, certainly some, maybe all, of the sessions in the House last week. And you would have seen, I guess, for a full day, both Power Advisory as well as JP Morgan. And I will restate, some of their qualifications. JP Morgan, one of the biggest firms in the world, and certainly Power Advisory in Canada, one of the most respected and significantly talented people in energy. So around in Canada and into the United States. So the reason why we found the absolute best people we could that were not conflicted, because they couldn't be conflicted and provide for advice to Quebec as well. We wanted to ensure that the people that advised us on how should we value these assets go forward? What are the opportunities that Quebec has? What are the financial metrics and inputs that we need to financially value this opportunity? So the question is certainly asked of those folks. They are, as much as people say, well, you paid for them, so therefore they are not independent or they are not unbiased. And the example I gave in the House last week, which I think is probably the tidiest one that so many people have access to, is auditors. People go out and they purchase audit services, and they will provide for their advice. They will provide for their input, and their ability to continue as an advisor to any other company is based on the fact that they have to provide exactly for their advice. So that is 100% what happened with Power Advisory as well as JP Morgan, is that they provided input to us into this MOU, which would be their independent advice. We certainly did not pay them to tell us what we wanted to hear. But I needed to restate that is normal. And I think, some of the conversations, not to get too political by any stretch, but, some of the debate in the House last week was, well, certainly the various parties also hired their own experts. And with by extension, would those folks then be, I guess, paid for to have a certain opinion by the opposition? So I don't quite, I understand the concept, but I need to say that these folks for us have been independent and unbiased. Then what is about to happen is the consumer advocate will form a panel to provide for oversight. First, I think, review of the MOU, and certainly oversight of the negotiating team as we move into the next phase. And they will have folks at their disposal. And I believe I recall it being said they will also have access to funds to execute their work. So I do think that, they will have to go out and find, who they're going to use for their advice. And hopefully that will be considered independent, even though they will be paid. It'll be really important for us to understand that there is a lot of oversight that will occur. And there's been a lot of independent folks that have been engaged to date, the best we could find.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. I'm going to move to another question now about, we talked about jobs and hiring and those things. And who is going to run these new plants? I know we have here at Hydro have a really important partner with the IBEW, and some of those folks are probably listening today and may have questions about who's going to run these future plants like Gull Island and the additional powerhouse once they are constructed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Deanne. Yeah, I'll take that one. You're right. We have a really important relationship with IBEW. Folks would have heard me speak about that in the public last week. Not everyone loved that I said that. Not everyone loved that I showed a bit of passion, but that's okay. I still think it's really important, and I know that some folks really appreciate that. So I'm going to continue to stand up for the folks that operate these assets in often very difficult circumstances. But in a continuation of both Muskrat Falls as well as Churchill Falls, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro will be the operators of all of the assets in province. Will be the operators of the new AC transmission line. It won't be a DC transmission line like the Labrador Island Link. We'll be the operators of certainly upgraded units, which are just upgraded units. So the team will continue with that. The second powerhouse, as well as Gull Island.
Great, thank you for that. I'll move to another question now that comes from Josh, who asks, what is the anticipated timeline for Gull Island construction? And please outline the start date and the length of the project. So did you want to jump in for that one, Michael?
Sure. Yeah. So the anticipated commissioning date for both Gull Island and the Churchill Falls expansion, so CF2 as we call it, is 2035. We will say that that is a very aggressive target. We would need to get started on construction as soon as possible to meet that date. But that is contained and that is the agreed upon target date for those projects in the MOU, 2035. Of course, the transmission would also have to be constructed and ready for that same date because none of the generation works without the transmission to interconnect it. And then the last thing I'll say is the Churchill Falls upgrades. So the upgrades of the 11 existing units in the CF plant are a little different. They are to be done one a year starting in 2028. So the first one will come online, targeted for 2028. We will do one each summer thereafter for 11 years that follow until all 11 units are upgraded.
Fabulous. Thanks for that. We have a question from Peter who says, will these monies pay down Muskrat Falls debt and lower hydro rates for Newfoundland and Labrador?
Okay, I can jump in there. So the provincial government of the time, whether the current or future, will decide how increased revenues will be spent. I have heard just, some of the answers to some of the questions. They are talking about paying down debt, talking about investing in the province, talking about future funds. So certainly I think a government question to say specifically how they plan on using the funds. But I do want to talk about Muskrat Falls in particular for a moment. And there is currently a rate mitigation plan out to 2030. And the rate mitigation plan and how the costs of muskrat are to be dealt with is well established for the next 5 years, now in 2025. And basically is Newfoundland Labrador Hydro will use all of its internally generated funds to pay for rate mitigation. And so there's no further money required from the provincial government on a forecast basis everything that we can see now, that would require any further, we wouldn't have to dip into the $17 billion, right? So that $17 billion can be untouched and direct to Treasury. So there wouldn't be any further need to reach in for Muskrat Falls rate mitigation requirements. After 2030, a government of the time will have to decide how will it handle rate mitigation then. But I would hope that any future government would have a commitment as well to the public on how they want to do everything they can to keep rates as affordable as possible.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jennifer. And a question from Barry. Can we sign a short agreement on the MOU, no longer than 10 years, and then revisit the MOU after we assess the value to Newfoundland and Labrador? So, Walter, did you want to take that one?
Yes, I will do. Yeah, I hear a question like this fairly frequently. Let's keep in mind that Hydro-Quebec already has a 17-year contract with us right now, which gives them power for 0.2 cents. So Hydro-Quebec, if they were offered a 10-year contract today at some price, I mean, it would not make sense for them to do that. They already have a 17-year contract. So they would not have any incentive to do a contract that's certainly any shorter than that. And if they are in a place right now, as I explained earlier, where they're really looking at their energy security long term and access to more power, which tends to be a long-term issue, where we can get maximum value for this province is by being able to offer a product that helps meet the energy security needs of Quebec. However, there is also a risk with a long contract of 50 years if you don't do the pricing right. And, that's why we have moved away from fixed pricing. And that's why we've moved away, for the big part of this deal, moved away even from really naming precisely what the price will be. And instead, we have a target number and we've got a series of price indices. And so we're essentially setting a baseline and then saying, as the market moves and as the cost of new generation moves, then this price needs to move. So we believe that what we've done is we've future-proofed the contract. So, basically whatever happens to the market, there will be a recalculation that happens along the way, so that we're never caught again in a place where, the price for the energy moves away from what it's worth.
Thanks for that. And now we have a question from Sean about Schedule H in the MOU. And Sean asks if we can essentially explain Schedule H. It says that the $3.5 billion is being paid in installments from 2025 to 2075, I assume here. But starting in 2028, these installments are conditional. What explains the difference in unconditional versus conditional installments? Michael, you want to take that one?
Sure, and thanks for that question. So I will explain Schedule H, but let's first remind everybody what that $3.5 billion is. So it is the amount that we have negotiated that Hydro-Quebec is going to pay to Newfoundland Labrador Hydro or Newfoundland Labrador for the right to co-develop those projects in our jurisdiction. So it is correct that of that $3.5 billion, the first $1.3 billion is unconditional. And it's split to come over 3 years. As you can see in Schedule H, it comes in 2025, 2026, and 2027. Unconditional means that once that money is paid to us, if for some reason Gull Island does not proceed, it is not refundable. Newfoundland and Labrador gets to keep that first $1.3 billion. The remainder of the $3.5 billion is paid by Hydro-Quebec to us as equity is required for the projects being constructed. If the project for some reason is not constructed, that money will not flow to Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you for that. And just letting folks know that we're entering into the last 30 minutes of our webinar here. And just a reminder that you can press star on your phone to be connected to an operator who will enter your question into the question queue, or raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue for those online. And then you can enter your question in there. I'll now move to a question from Christine, who says, would the new power price from the contract escalator include a component that considers Hydro-Quebec's new build price? Wouldn't this escalator be a moving target based on what Hydro-Quebec provides as their new build price? And I see, Walter, you'd like to answer that one?
Yes, great question. And yes, it will be precisely that. The new price will include a component that is linked to new build costs in Quebec. So if those new builds go precisely where we think they're going to go in terms of cost, then the pricing will be as it appears in all of our forecasts, as it appears in Schedule G of the MOU that you can read. If those new build costs go up higher than that, for example, if there's more growth and costs have to go higher, well, that component of the pricing will go higher. So the number will actually go higher than the published number. So you're exactly right. Cost to build other projects in Quebec is one of the inputs that sets our price that we receive for Churchill Falls.
Great, thank you for that. And now we have a question from Alan, who says, or asks, if Quebec decided to not develop Gull Island, would Newfoundland and Labrador be able to enter negotiations with other potential partners or proceed on their own?
Yep, I can take that, Deanne.
Sure.
Yep, thanks for that question. Yes, short answer is yes. We will be able to proceed with others if Quebec chooses not to proceed. Quebec are a good partner. They have done many projects in the past. We believe they would be a great partner in this development. As you've heard, they are going to pay us our equity for this, which would be incredible for us to give us a leg up. Therefore, we own a majority, 60% ownership. But if after they get a number of years into this and in their assessment for a number of different reasons, they choose not to proceed, we indeed can pursue this project with any other partner.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. A question now from Dion, who asks, what will Newfoundland Labrador's ownership of the Gull Island joint venture be? For all three projects, how will project cost overruns affect Newfoundland Labrador's ownership and the price we receive? Will overruns be paid back to Hydro-Quebec? Michael?
Thanks, and great question. So first of all, specifically, the ownership of the Gull Island joint venture is contained in the MOU. That company will be owned 60% by Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro and 40% by Hydro-Quebec. However, you'll remember in the presentation that we said on the whole, the split for the projects will be about the same as it is now, meaning 2/3 for Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro and 1/3 for Hydro-Quebec. That is because the transmission associated with these new projects in the MOU is 100% owned by Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, such that in the aggregate, all of the projects are approximately 2/3, 1/3. In terms of cost overruns, that is also covered in the MOU. For cost overruns on Gull Island or CF2, those costs are paid for by Hydro-Quebec as the principal off-taker in the plant. If the costs go up and there are cost overruns, there is no scenario in which the ownership of those facilities could change. That will always remain the same. That means essentially, if there are cost overruns and the costs go up, so too then will the price that Hydro-Quebec has to pay through the power purchase agreements to cover those cost overruns. Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro does not bear that risk.
Thank you for that, Michael. A question coming now from Paula, who asks, can you expand more on the improved water management agreement and what this will entail? How will water rights be dealt with for Gull Island and the expanded Upper Churchill? I see, Walter, you would like to take that one?
Yes, I'm just putting the hand up, but if anybody else wants to at any time, by all means. I do like to talk about water management. I worked for CFLCO for a few years in Churchill Falls, and it's certainly a topic that I find interesting. I mean, right now we've got 2 power plants on the Churchill River, and we will likely have 3 or maybe 4 if you count Churchill Falls 2 as a separate plant, all operating on the same river. And when you have plants on the same river, generally around the world, there are agreements between the plants to ensure that they work together to optimize the output of the river. So one plant can't, hog the water and prevent a plant downriver from getting enough water, or even having to operate at a less than efficient output. So the plants are intended to work together, make sure we get the most renewable energy out of this resource. We don't do that today fully on the Churchill River because the old contract with Hydro-Quebec enables Hydro-Quebec to fully control what the Churchill Falls plant does and can prevent it from really helping out the Muskrat Falls plant, which is really supplying the island of Newfoundland. So Muskrat supplying the island, it's a very important plant for our energy security here in this province. So this new agreement, Hydro-Quebec has agreed to take the shackles off Churchill Falls when it comes to sharing water, and that Churchill Falls will cooperate fully with Gull Island and with Muskrat Falls and with CF2 to ensure that all the plants work together to push out the maximum amount of renewable energy that river can produce. And it makes sense because Hydro-Quebec would become a partner that would, get power from Gull Island in the future. And certainly we would benefit in the markets when Hydro-Quebec benefits in the markets. So, we would start to get those market prices and those other, prices that reflect the energy's value back to Newfoundland and Labrador. So it makes sense. It's a commitment Hydro-Quebec has made. And there's a section in the MOU on water management. It's very clear what they're committing to do. Hopefully that boils it down.
Thank you for that, Walter. A question from Trevor, who asks about the current price, asking, is the 30% increase of the current price a base price, meaning that the amount to be received over the next 17 years could be higher than presented? Walter, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just quick correction. So that it's actually 30 times higher price. It's not 30% higher. I guess it's a 3,000% higher price, or 30 times higher, because in just using today's dollars, we'll be talking about a starting today's dollar average price of 5.9 cents versus 0.2. But you did get it exactly right in terms of it is a base price. And so, yes, it could be higher if market prices go higher. If the cost to build new plants in Quebec goes higher than current projections, then absolutely the price will be adjusted upwards. So part of the future proofing is to make sure this always gets recalculated and re-baselined. So that's exactly the intent. And there's more details in Schedule F of the MOU. If you read it on the ourchapter.ca website, the MOU, it's a little bit legalese. Sorry, no offense, Michael, to you and all of our lawyers, but sometimes can be not super easy to read. But Schedule F pretty clearly lays out how pricing would be adjusted over time.
Thank you. We now have a question from Dennis, who is asking about the additional power we have in Labrador. How much power are we talking about for the industrial growth in Labrador? There was talk of it being 4 times more. What is the possible or projected number?
Mm-hmm. I can jump in, Deanne.
Yeah.
So Labrador currently has access to 525 megawatts. I know that we don't always want to get too much into the math of this, but this is an important question. I think it is looking specifically for the math. So we currently have access to 525 megawatts. And anybody in Labrador would know what that means from an industrial development perspective. You can see around you what that has translated into. So between the beginning of the contract, or it starts in 2031, is when we've negotiated to get access to more power from the existing facility, right up to the end of the contract. There's another almost 1,500 megawatts. So on top of the 525, almost another 15. So it's basically the end number that Newfoundland Labrador Hydro will have is 1,990 megawatts. And we certainly were informed from, I guess, that from picking that number of what is possible into the future. And that is, again, you think about what has been in place for the last number of decades, 525, 1,500 additional is a significant amount of power to be able to say yes with confidence to a number of the customers that we've been talking with for years. I will say that, and again, this gentleman is probably quite familiar with the demand in Labrador. If anybody follows the Public Utilities Board filings that we have, I think there was 2 or 3 years ago, we actually had a filing to the Public Utilities Board that said, hey, we had requests from customers for 8,000 megawatts. So just a huge number. But that was just folks coming and kicking the tires. We then start talking with a lot of these customers and telling them about what the actual costs would be to hook up. And then a lot of customers walk away. So the amount of power because they don't want to pay the high price, I'm saying the price, they don't want to pay the price for power that it is. But for the amount that we have kept as available to this jurisdiction, we do believe that there are customers that want that power. And we do believe those are viable customers. And we do believe that those are customers that understand what the costs will be and that will indeed get developed for the benefit, certainly of Labrador and for the broader province.
Jennifer, can I add to that just briefly? For folks who want to see the numbers, because it did start as a math question, the detailed allocation of volumes from the MOU is contained in a schedule. So it's Schedule E, which clearly sets out the allocations to Newfoundland Labrador Hydro and Hydro-Quebec and the years in which those allocations come on.
Actually, that's a good point, Michael. So when I said it starts in 2031, somebody might say, well, we should get access to that power now. And there is ability for us to get access to very small amounts. But for the big industrial growth, in order for, I think that might have been part of the question too, Deanne, in order to get access to Lab West, Newfoundland Labrador Hydro will have to build another transmission line on top of the 4 projects that we've talked about to get power from Churchill Falls to Lab West. And so in order for us to, get the mining companies to say yes, they have to financially contribute to that construction and that engineering, to then go through an environmental assessment process for that, to go through various approvals, and then complete the construction. We have forecast that the soonest we could get that really big power delivered to Lab West would be 2031. So when you see in that schedule that Michael just mentioned, we're not getting power till 2031, all of those other steps would be in place. And I would say that is still fairly aggressive for us to get all of that work done, again, with the various companies that would have to financially contribute to getting that power to Lab West.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. A question from Shelley about jobs. Shelley says, you explained those qualified as red seals. Will you also be hiring apprentices?
Sorry, I had to get off mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think how there'll be two sort of aspects that I envision here with this question with regards to apprentices. And there'll be apprentices as it relates to future operations. So, for example, at Muskrat Falls now, we're hiring apprentices there to operate that plant. And we would certainly be doing the same thing for an expansion of operators for the and other types of trades and skill sets. So there would absolutely be hiring of apprentices into the future. With regards to apprentices as it relates to the construction, I would imagine that there will be a plan and a process to incorporate that there. Obviously, apprentices have to be supervised by qualified folks, so I think it will be part of the labor force. So yeah, it's qualified is clearly understood to have your red seal, but just the labor force will indeed have to have additional labor associated with it. So I would suggest that yes, there will be apprentices hired as well.
Great, thank you for that. And a question from Sean, who asks, on slide 11 of the presentation today, it states that price from new developments will increase annually at 2%. What does this mean? Is this a set increase that is contrary to the inflation-adjusted approach that should be tied to market forces? I'm not sure. Jennifer, did you want to take that one and explain the difference between the Churchill Falls power purchase agreement and then the new developments?
I was sneezing, sorry. Did you repeat the question?
Walter can take it. Walter, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Why 2% for the new developments and some kind of link to market for Churchill Falls? And it's so really what we've got here is two separate components, and the new developments will be set up to recover all of the costs of building a new development, whatever they go to, overruns included, unless Hydro-Quebec decides, they're too expensive and they don't want to continue, in which case we get the project rights back, obviously, to partner with somebody else. But the idea is all of the costs will be recovered by the Hydro-Quebec purchase price, plus there will be an 8 to 9% return on our investment. And that investment will come from Hydro-Quebec's original fund of the $3.5 billion that they provide. So, but then the entire pricing will be shaped on a 2% escalator. So it is a fixed escalator of 2%, but it is an escalator that has, before it's applied, a guarantee that all of the costs are included regardless, even if it's 30 years into the contract and operating costs go higher, those get passed back through as a flow through, and the 8 to 9% return gets included. So if we see a very big spike in later years with the inflation passing way beyond 2%, we will still be operating on the 2% for the new developments, but with a guarantee that all costs, higher costs, get covered and a guaranteed rate of return. And 80% of the value in this deal is in Churchill Falls, which is fully linked to market, fully linked to the costs of new development, and fully linked to the cost being paid by neighboring utilities in the US, for example. So you'll get a full sharing of that benefit of the inflationary environment in the 80%, and you'll get a guaranteed stream of revenue with a guaranteed return in the 20%, which is the new development block.
Great. Thank you, Walter. Folks, just a reminder, we're entering into the final stages now. We've got about 12 minutes left for this webinar. And a reminder, you can press star on your phone and get connected to an operator who will enter your question into the question queue, or you can press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to join the question queue and enter your question there. We'll go to another one now from Andrew, who asks, could you please explain how fair market value for electricity is set in Canada or in our province? And how does that relate to this current price agreement set at 6 cents per kilowatt hour? Did you, Walter, I see you want to jump in there?
Yeah, fair value can't really be set by a single number or a single price index. So we've described in Schedule F a combination of different pricing indices that taken together represent fair value. So some people would say, well, what the Americans are paying Quebec for power, that's fair value. And that is one of the components in Schedule F, but that's not all that represents or describes fair value, because, you know, there are higher prices often paid in Quebec for these long-lived assets that are going to provide electricity for decades. So another component, as I talked about earlier, is how much Quebec pays to build plants in Quebec. That will also be another factor that goes in and is considered part of what we define as fair value. And how do we know that we're getting a fair? We are requiring in that schedule that all of these price indices be verifiable. So they can't be, they're not simply numbers that Hydro-Quebec, you know, shares with us, or, you know, a particular pricing point. We will have the right to audit and verify, you know, what the new costs in Quebec are, and audit and verify what the market prices are that Hydro-Quebec gets in the markets. And all those together are various components of fair value. It's not a single point, but rather a basket, so that we really have diverse, de-risked approach.
Great. Thank you for that, Walter. We have another question from David, who asks, will Churchill Falls 2 require new turbines? Are they simply being replaced because they are getting old, regardless of the MOU? So, Michael, you want to jump in there?
Sure, I'll jump in there and give Walter a break from speaking. So great question, and I think there might be some confusion there. So I'm going to differentiate between Churchill Falls 2, which is the expansion, and the Churchill Falls upgrades, which is the upgrades of the existing 11 units at the existing plant. So Churchill Falls 2 is an entirely new facility. So as Walter said, an underground powerhouse just to the west of the existing powerhouse with 2 turbines in it. So those turbines are indeed new because of the entire facility is new. The upgrades, on the other hand, are the upgrades of the 11 existing units at the current Churchill Falls plant. They have not yet reached their end of life, so eventually they would have needed to be done. That is correct, but we are advancing that in time and doing it sooner as part of this memorandum of understanding.
Thank you, Michael. A question now from Josh, who says, it's noted that Newfoundland and Labrador has no risk financially for construction of the new projects. But what if Hydro-Quebec run into issues during construction or commissioning which delay the completion of the projects? Is NL at risk of missing future revenue if projects are delayed?
I don't mind jumping in there, Deanne. So the concept of there's no risk for the province financially is really to be taken in context of what Muskrat Falls was meant. Significantly, I shouldn't say not only, but significantly. And the issue with Muskrat Falls was that we built the facility and we needed it for our own domestic purposes. And so all of the costs had to be paid for by this jurisdiction. And that's the difference with Gull Island. So Gull Island is going to be project managed by Quebec. We will be a majority owner. And again, they're paying our equity to become that majority owner. So that's where one part of the no risk financially comes in, is that we don't have to come up with our equity in order into this project. So that's part one. Then part two is if it becomes materially delayed or the costs go up, and therefore if it's delayed, the costs are going to go up. We all know that. The longer things take, the more it costs. How those costs would be then covered is Quebec will have to basically continue paying for it, continue constructing it in whatever time frame it takes. And then the costs to complete it, they will have to secure additional debt, and the cost of that debt is paid for in the average price that they'll pay at the outset. So for example, if they say, well, it's 11 cents a kilowatt hour to construct in their view today, and let's say all of the costs for the time frame it takes or whatever things they encounter, it means that all of the costs, including the debt, makes it 22 cents a kilowatt hour. They then have to pay that cost. So it's not as if then we have to come up with any money to put into that joint venture. So that's when we say, that's why there's no risk for us. So that's the difference between Muskrat Falls and this one. So then the last part of that question was, well, does it mean there'd be a delay in getting the revenue? And, certainly we would say yes. So let's say it's 5 years delayed. Then yes, the delay in the revenue, because they're not going to start paying for it until the project is complete. It would delay it, but that would just push, out. So, and if they're, again, going back to the basic premise, they've got almost 40 gigawatts of facilities built in their province. We have 8 to 10. They have done a lot of this work. There is no better partner than Hydro-Quebec to undertake this work. And so we believe that even the risk of that, I'm not foolish enough to think that there's not going to be things encountered. Of course, there's going to be things encountered, but we do believe that they're a really great partner to work through whatever might happen. They're probably the best partner for that to occur.
Thank you very much. And I just want to let folks know that we're nearing the end of our session, and I want to thank everyone for their participation. We have time for one final question. And this one is, and Jennifer, I guess, or Walter, whoever wants to jump in, but this individual says, I'm wondering how the MOU is going to be beneficial for the average Newfoundlander or Labradorian.
Okay. Yep. Sure. I can certainly take that.
Sure.
And also for anybody who didn't get a question answered, over the course of the 4 sessions that we're having, we're going to look for, the common themes, the common questions, and work toward getting answers and post those, because we certainly don't want to leave your questions unanswered. And there'll be opportunities over the coming couple of years to continue to engage with us. So thank you for joining. So how is this beneficial to the average Newfoundlander and Labradorian? At its most fundamental, we could do nothing for the next 17 years and essentially bring almost no money to provincial treasury every year, or we could bring an average of $1 billion between now and 2041. Direct to treasury, not needed for Muskrat, not needed for investments in Labrador, work, anything like that. So that is direct to provincial treasury. That is then up to the government to decide how that should indeed benefit the most Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as possible. So that is really a question for how is government planning on building both a good future, a good today, a good present time, and a good future. So at its most fundamental, we have the opportunity to access $17 billion that without this, we would not have. And that's just direct to treasury for the CFPPA. Then there's all of the jobs, which will also then bring, tax revenue, income tax revenue, all of the knock-on effects and called the economic growth that would happen in the province within that same time period. So those are really the 2 big things. And, at an emotional level, it is hung over all of us. If you're, 20 and above, it has hung over all of us for so long, and it really does change. I don't want to get too political, but it certainly means a lot to us as a team. It does change how we all interact with and think about this opportunity. So again, we're chugging along. The team does a great job in Churchill Falls now, but it is an untapped potential, both from a revenue stream perspective, as well as all of those major projects. So it really is that, I think, is how it just affects it improves the psyche of the province associated with this. So that would be, I think, how that certainly does benefit the whole province.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to squeeze in one final question. And I think this is probably one we'll pass over to Walter. And Kathy asks, will the Muskrat Falls transmission lines be incorporated? Can we use that to sell to the rest of Canada versus Hydro-Quebec doing that? I know it's probably not a quick answer, Walter, but pass that one over to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, all the transmission that we have in Labrador and to the island will work together for this, new build. But keep in mind that the Labrador Island link is a 900 megawatt link. It means that it's enough to carry all of the Muskrat power to the island, but there's not a lot of extra space on that line. During the summer and the fall and the spring, when the line's not fully used, we will be able to bring more power from Churchill Falls down based on this new deal to the island to help offset costs on the island and then send on to Nova Scotia. That will absolutely be possible. But during the winter peak period, we are expecting that Muskrat Falls will essentially fill the Labrador Island link and will be fully used on the island of Newfoundland to help meet our energy needs here on the island. And therefore, there won't be much space left to transfer to the island.
Thank you for that. And folks, that was our final question for today. I want to thank you, our speakers, and for everyone who joined us today. Your questions and insights have made this an engaging discussion. If we didn't get to your question, please visit ourchapter.ca for more information. There is frequently asked questions. There are resources and documents and that you can go to and get many of your common questions answered. And I would like to thank you all for taking the time to be with us. And it was a pleasure for us to be here to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.